know you. My name's Stuart Burgess. I'm from the Home Cinema Alliance and Immersive Cinema Rooms. Today, I wanted to sit down and have a one-to-one with David Meyerowitz from Trinnov, and basically just have a conversation about Trinnov for anybody who doesn't know Trinnov, and about the new waveforming technology. So let's start it at the top with a bit of a broad opener. So thanks for coming today, David.
Thanks for having me.
And so tell me a bit about yourself. Tell me a bit about your history in our custom installation trade and what took you to Trinnov.
Yeah, so thanks, Stuart. I haven't actually been in the industry all that long by comparison. Many of my contemporaries have been in decades, and I've not long completed my first decade in the industry, actually. And I started with InVision, actually, interestingly, was where I got my first job in the industry. So I came from sort of consumer electronic sales and then into InVision, where I started as a technical sales support. So long and short, if the phone rang, I would pick it up. And if I could deal with it, I would. If I wouldn't, I would pass it over to whoever. Okay. Very, very quickly, I got into sort of the automation sector, particularly. That grabbed my attention very quickly, and I started doing some programming with what was Pro Control at the time, and then moved through to RTI, and then it just went from there. So I got involved with networking, I got involved with security, multi-room audio, and I went through various different roles in InVision. I was there for 7 years. And I finished my last couple of years doing training. So I was...
I think that's where we got to know each other. I think it was a network training, I think.
Most likely, yeah.
Network training. And I think that's where we got to sort of know each other and sort of swap phone numbers right from those days.
That's exactly it. And then, going through that training program, I was expanding it and moving into Trinnov. And I was speaking with my now colleague, Tom Garrett. And I was going to take over the training for Trinnov in the UK and do all the certification and everything. And it wasn't too long after that a sales position became available. And I sat down with Arno Labrie, and we went from there.
So for those people watching that don't know Trinnov, obviously we live in our little bubble where we know everybody and know everything about everybody. But obviously people viewing, people who follow the HCA or just general YouTube followers might not have heard of Trinnov.
Yep.
So we know you from the home cinema.
Mm-hmm.
Trinnov obviously in home hi-fi, the studio and the pro cinema.
Correct, yeah.
So give us a little bit of background on Trinnov for us.
Yeah, it's not surprising that many of your listeners may not have heard of Trinnov. We're not a household brand like your big brands that you associate. But that's purely because we're doing something very different. We are focused mainly on audio research. So the company started just over 20 years ago. So we celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. Company started 20 years ago with Arno Labrie, Remy Bruneau and Sebastian Montoya. They met at IRCAM in Paris. So that's the French Institute of Audio Science, basically. And they met during their degrees and came up with some research for, how should we say, recording and playing back immersive audio, which it wasn't called immersive audio at the time. It was 3D ambisonic sound was what they were researching.
A bit more punchy immersive, isn't it?
It's got a better ring to it, hasn't it? But that research began, and there's a lovely picture of Arno Labrie in his grandmother's living room with 22 speakers dotted around him, all the same with a PC on the floor. And that started it off, because as soon as he started playing back through those speakers, he realized that they all sounded different. Even though they were the same speaker physically, they all sounded different based on where they were in the room. So that's where the optimizer was born, because the actual capture of the data that they needed to reproduce the audio was fairly straightforward by comparison. But getting a cohesive sound field to accurately reproduce that was quite something else. So that's really where it started. That led us into broadcast to begin with. So we're working with the French TV ORF in their outside broadcast vehicles, where they've got monitoring and solutions in their vans, and then right up to home AV recording studios and the commercial cinemas that we're involved with still today.
So touching on commercial cinema, because obviously we're gonna touch on the home cinema side of it, or the cinema in the home, and the new technology with the sort of like commercial cinema, pro cinema. If someone wants to go to a Trinnov cinema, a pro cinema, is that something we'll find on every high street, or is that something that is a bit more boutique, like around the back corner in Soho?
It's fair to say, much like with anything, Trinnov related, we certainly do cater to the more boutique end of the market. And when you say boutique, it really means that there's a real focus and an emphasis on sound quality. There's plenty of cinemas around with Trinnov. We should really write a list and a map on the website of where you can go to see these. But what you do get out of a commercial cinema, which is fundamentally built to a budget. Their model is return on investment.
Well, the businesses, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They've got to get return on investment, and the cinemas that have Trinnov in are often very well reviewed for their audio quality, and we like to think that's not a coincidence. And that brings the justification forward. But commercial cinema's going through a change in itself. There's a company in the Netherlands that are doing private hire theatres. So commercial cinema content with the ability to have consumer content, 6 to 12 seats, and you hire it out for your mates for not a huge amount of money, really. But that's the way the industry is sort of changing from the sort of 200-300 seat type.
I think we're quite lucky. Both of us are quite lucky. I mean, I've been in this industry for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
And, we go next door in where we are today, and we've got a state-of-the-art cinema running Trinnov's new technologies. And I think we sometimes become a bit blasé to what we know as being a good cinema.
Yeah.
And I think the everyman, not to use a high street name, but they're used to commercial cinema. So actually, I think is a good mixture of having that private place that you could hire that gives you high-end cinema, but as the end client, you don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, nice. It's a nice combination, if you like. We all when you're into your movies, you want the day of release content.
Yeah.
That is prohibitively expensive. In even in this market, it's available, but it has a price to it. So that sort of mix of options out there in the market is vital, I think. Awesome.
I think one of the big things I take away from the near 20 years I've been in this industry, there's few manufacturers out there. There's lots of manufacturers out there. But there's a few manufacturers out there who seem to do a lot of research and development, and then there's manufacturers that sort of follow the curve. Mm-hmm. So if a competitor releases it, I go back to when I was a kid, and I remember my first car had electric windows in it.
Gotcha.
And it was something that you could fit yourself. Mm-hmm. And then because you couldn't afford it unless you were a high-end £100,000 car. Yeah. So Trinnov, for me, seemed to do a lot of research and development, and they seem to push the boundaries more than the run-of-the-mill off the production line type of manufacturer. So tell me a bit more about the research and development that Trinnov do into new platforms.
Yeah, I mean, we are research partners with the big three codec manufacturers that I'm sure many of the listeners will have heard of: Dolby, DTS, Oro, 3D. They are the three juggernauts in this industry of content, and we're research partners with those guys. They use Trinnov in their facilities, and we're also proud of our research, and we like to share it.
Yeah.
We like to share what we've done. We released I think it was probably nearly 10 years ago, the first revision of our loudspeaker position guide white paper. And that was a white paper that came about for a need for this industry in particular, because all of the industry-led design documentation at the time was based around a single listener, which was the mixing engineer.
Yeah.
And of course, when you get into the home, it naturally lends itself to being a multi-listener experience, but you've also got to accommodate cross-platform. So, those three codecs that I mentioned. So Arno and my colleague John Heron sat down and thrashed this out. So I say thrashed it out, obviously took weeks of work, but that came about, and this speaker guide allows all listeners to get a similar level of performance, as well as covering all of the different formats, and that's unique. There is no other manufacturer in our market that's giving that kind of research, or doing that kind of research and then giving it back to the consumer. And that research has now been absorbed by RP22.
Yeah.
Which we've covered on other podcasts. But, we've then been working on waveforming, which we'll get into in a bit.
Yeah.
That's been 6 years of research for us. So these things take a long, long time before they come to fruition. And that's why we have upwards of 30 to 40 R&D engineers in Paris.
With my knowledge of Trinnov products, you are very much more about audio decoding and bespoke algorithms, rather than, again, just using what's available on the shelf, and because that's what other people are doing.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I could give you lots of examples where we've taken the off the shelf, looked at it and thought, do you know what, we can do that better. And that, that can be to our detriment, but at the same time, that is just the culture in the business of striving for better quality and better reproduction. That's fundamentally why we do it.
Well, the thing is, if you don't look at competitors, if you don't look at what's available, then how do you develop away from it?
Exactly.
Or how do you develop these new things? So let's get on to the subject of double bass array. Again, from my knowledge of double bass array, we're sort of looking at, let's just say, you're looking at the subs at the front, subs at the back, and then basically the idea is that the subs at the back produce a cancellation. Is that correct? Am I on the right waveform?
Yeah.
Without using a pun.
Pun intended. Yeah, very much. And, it's a really interesting technology, and actually the physics behind that technology is very, very good. The positioning of the subs relative to the size of the room is very, very good. Where it lets itself down is that there's very few parameters you can tweak, and it's not a measured system. What I mean by that is that you've effectively got two speakers to work with. You've got the front speakers and you've got the back speakers, and then you have level and delay that you can play with. So, when you don't massage those individual speakers individually, you lose a lot of control. And the double bass array goes a long way towards what we're achieving with waveforming, but it has its inherent limitations, and that comes by way of flexibility and tunability.
Okay, so let's touch on the elephant in the room, which is waveforming. So how long is it, before we sort of dive into how it works, how long has it been in development? How long have you guys been tinkering in Paris with it?
Yeah, it's been a long road, and before I started with Trinnov, the original design and sort of first implementations came out, and it's been 6 years worth of work, and we estimate it'll be another 10 years worth of future development. And we're talking about a technology which you could bring under the umbrella of active acoustics. So we're focused very much on the bass region at the moment, which is, as a lot of your listeners will know, the hardest part to get right, because you're fighting physics all the time. High and mid frequency is reasonably easy by comparison to deal with. It still has its challenges, but the bass is always going to be the problem. So that's phase one, is dealing with that, and then of course that can extend up the frequency range and move into that'll be the third, fourth tier of research after that. So we've got a long road still to go.
So we're looking at waveforming. How does that differ from a basic standard bass array setup? I mean, what's the uniqueness of it?
Well, we process each of the subwoofers individually. So as I mentioned, a double bass array or that type of technology takes four subs, let's say, and groups them together at the front, and then groups them together at the back in an identical array. And as I mentioned, the problem with that is that the rooms that we work with in homes theatre, they aren't the ideal shape. They never are, but they're not the ideal shape for a double bass array. It was designed for a cube. So equilateral walls,
perfect
ceilings, exactly, a perfect cube. And that's just not the reality. And also, when you're creating the wavefront and you're putting inconvenient things in the way, like people, sofas, that breaks up the cancellation wave. So it's only ever going to have so much performance. And the benefit of of what we're doing with waveforming is giving minute control over each of those speakers, so we can extract all of that and overcome a lot of the inherent limitations of the room itself.
Brilliant. So looking at Trinnov, for anybody that is new to Trinnov, doesn't understand or is not aware of Trinnov, so for what we will do in the home cinema industry, or the cinema in the home, we've got two products. You've got the Altitude 16 and Altitude 32. Yeah. If my training remembers rightly, that's 20 and 36 channels respectively.
Correct. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Doesn't fit the naming structure, so
I'm glad I've got my certificate. So how many channels do you need to do waveforming? So could you fit it into a smaller room, or is it just for bigger rooms using the 36 channels?
Sure. The good thing is that the size of the room isn't the limiting factor.
Yeah.
The size of the room dictates how many subwoofers we would advise, and when we say what we would advise, you can always get away with a smaller number. Everyone always wants the how should we say, the easiest way to implement these kind of technologies.
Yes.
And but what we're striving for is to solve the issue of standing waves and room modes in small rooms. And that may or may not mean something to your listeners, but that is overcoming the physics of a room. This has nothing to do with speakers now. Right. This is purely the dimensions that you give the room. When you get down into those low frequencies, they start to interact with each other. And that is a function of the room size, nothing to do with speakers. You could buy whatever subwoofer you like, spend as much money as you like, you will still be fighting the physics. So that's what waveforming is designed to do. So you can start with as little as 4 subwoofers, okay, which is a very popular number of subs for a cinema. And you can go really up to as many as you like. We've done some very, very high channel count systems for very specific reasons. And then we've also done a lot of lower channel count tests. We're working a lot with Cricks in Australia, speaker brand in Australia, who often use 4 subs in their systems. And they're doing, I think they've got about 10 rooms now that they're trialing waveforming with these 4 sub layouts. So... Okay. It's anything from 4 and upwards, and you can't do it with anything less.
Right. So is that 4 in the front and 4 in the back, or 2 in the front, 2 in the back?
2 and 2.
Right.
Yeah. And the position of those can vary depending on the level of performance you're trying to achieve.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a very flexible system in that way. We've got a lot of scope for...
So, are there parameters that need to be followed for those? So let's go back to R2 and 2.
Yeah.
So first of all, if we've done 2 at the front, 2 at the back.
Yep.
I'm assuming that's 4 inputs, outputs taken up on an altitude.
It is, yeah. We need to address each of those channels individually. We need to know what we're measuring is the propagation of the sound wave from each of those speakers, and that's what feeds the algorithm to then create the cancellation. So we need to measure those subs individually. So yeah. It does take more discrete channels than previously.
Yeah.
And, going back to what we said about the Altitude 16 actually being a 20-channel processor,
yeah,
we added 4 channels recently to the digital output. So you could use those 4 extra channels that we gave you to individually address either 4 subwoofers you already have, or by adding 4 subwoofers to your system.
Because I think we touched on it as some training we did here at Pulse, which was actually... The 16 is a good little size and shouldn't be overlooked, because we can do a good 9 bed channel system using it.
Yeah, if you look at the majority of home theatres, certainly in the UK, with the size of rooms we have, we're not as lucky as our American colleagues with their huge amount of land mass.
Yeah.
Typically, 2 rows of seats is very, very popular. Or 1 row of seats, of course, but typically 2. So 9 bed layer channels is perfect for two rows.
Yep.
4 overhead channels is perfect for 2 rows. And then you've got 7 channels left over for subwoofers. You would typically use 4 in that sort of setup, which would take you up to your 16 channel limit. But we can go a bit higher than that and add a few more, or maybe do something like 4 in the front, 2 in the back.
Yeah.
So going up to 6 to create that solution, and then you've really got the best of both worlds. You've got the resolution required to faithfully recreate the audio, the 3D immersive audio, Dolby Atmos, whatever, and you've got the waveforming technology that's going to do the job of cleaning up the bass in the room. So that's a good mix.
And when we're talking about the subs, are there parameters you need to follow? So can we, take 4 subs at the front, unbox them, chuck them anywhere, or and then at the back set them here, there, and everywhere, or do they have to follow some parameters?
We do have some guidelines.
Right.
We've put those up onto the website, so they're freely available for anyone to look at. End clients as well as our dealer customers. And again, those parameters are based around the highest level of performance. Yeah. So we have some fairly strict guidelines as to where the subwoofers need to be placed. It is off the floor. Okay, so that's a bit of a shift for many people is getting subwoofers off the floor. Typically they'll go in the corners,
they're not on the floor 6 inches from the corner to get an extra dB gain.
Well, that's it. Yeah. And that is a very valid method of doing things, but when you're trying to fight the physics, you've got to work with the physics. And I started by talking about the double bass array, and where its foundation is very good is in the physics. Yeah, we can improve upon that, but fundamentally the positioning of those subwoofers, quarter way up the wall, 3/4 of the way up the wall, quarter of the way in, these sorts of locations are what work best for the physics. And it would be irresponsible to say that electronics can solve everything. Yeah, it can do a lot, and we can do a lot in the digital domain that can't be done in the passive domain. But fundamentally, you need good design, good engineering to get the best results. And we have different flavors of waveforming. Waveforming, as we're talking about it now, with the correct subwoofer positioning, with the subs, up high in the room and in those positions, that is the highest level of performance. You will hopefully see some press releases coming out very soon for the Munich Highend show, where we're working with a speaker manufacturer to produce a system that we're calling. We haven't worked. We need to work harder on the naming, but it's called Waveforming Cylindrical. Okay, and that's the sort of technical name for it, because we're producing a cylindrical wave with that, rather than a planar wave, which we're talking about with the previous approach. And that is, subs on the floor at the front and subs on the floor at the back. We've got 4 in the front, 4 in the back for this particular room. And again, that is another implementation of the technology. We can go even further with we would sort of term it as waveforming light, because it's the sort of lowest performance level of waveforming, where you have your 4 subwoofers in the corner. So we've got a lot of work to do to document all of this. We haven't even got to public release yet, and we're already talking about what's next. And we've already added features for what's next. I
suppose you're sort of looking at, we often refer to the automotive industry in our trade, quite often colorations over to the automotive industry. Yep. You go into a car showroom, you see the car that they're trying to say is always the top level, the top tier, because they want you to buy that car. But also, I go back to my comment about electric windows earlier, is all the nice stuff usually ends up at the top level and then sort of filters down into the everyday market.
Indeed, and the nice thing about a Trinnov product is that it's one component in that system. So to use your car analogy, to get the electric windows, you don't have to buy the whole car. Yeah, right. You can buy the audio processor, which can replace something that maybe needs updating anyway. And that can be a part of your system for a long, long time. The altitude that we have here at Pulse is serial number 82, and that was built back in 2015. Yeah. And due to the nature of the product and the software upgrades that we can offer and that longevity, that is now running state-of-the-art software with waveforming, et cetera, et cetera. So, for the hobbyists out there that are constantly chasing, new technologies, at least one component in the system can grow over time, and that's the altitude.
I seem to remember you saying to me a little while ago about walking past the test bench or repair bench at Trinnov, and there was serial number 1.
Yep.
Or
yeah, we
something
have
like that?
we have that in the lab. In the lab is serial number 1. The guys are giving her a name, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But she's
Put it in the comments below.
yeah, she's dear to our heart. But she's altitude number 1, and she does all the legwork. But we're still, servicing and repairing products that we made 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when we were doing OEMs for other manufacturers before we bought our own product to market. This is the benefit of the way and the philosophy around the company, the way it was built with the Intel motherboard processing. You can't compete with the mass manufacture with DSP chips, but then they have their own limitations, whereas we're free from those limitations. So yeah, it's testimony to Arno and the team as to where that began, with the PC motherboard recognizing that processing headroom was going to be the limiting factor for most things.
Yeah.
And having the forethought to build a product that could have such a long lifespan.
Well, I know we've got several jobs out there, but I know we've got one very eager client in London who I think before I can tell him that something's happened or been updated, he's on the blower to me saying, Stuart, can you come back because I need this recalibrated, or because I've now got these more channels I can add to it. So I can say from testament that we've certainly seen it at Immersive.
Yeah, and we've fundamentally in this market, and I don't want to tar everybody with the same brush because everyone's individual, but we've fundamentally got two ends of the market. We've got the high net worth individual who wants the best, and isn't actually necessarily interested in the technology. They're interested in the experience and the end results. And then we've got very much the hobbyists, and I mentioned them earlier. They're the foundation of our business. That's where multi-channel came from, was from hi-fi. It went from 2 channels to 4 channels to actually 3 channels in between, and then upwards from there. So these guys, they read a lot. They have very up-to-date information. They're very well versed in the technologies, and they want the latest and greatest. And that's fundamentally what we offer at Trinnov.
Our friends at AV Forums. I know that the guys here at Pulse had a bunch of them over 2 days a few weeks ago.
Yeah, we did. We did.
Everybody loved it, and there's lots of questions out of it.
Yeah, a huge amount of questions, and very, very, how do I say, discerning questions as well. They weren't just first layer. It was very deep technical questions, and that's because they're passionate. They read around the subject, and that's what we love.
So I suppose if we look at the AV Forums reader, if we look at the home cinema enthusiast, who might have invested a lot of money into the equipment already, can any brand of subwoofer or any type of subwoofer, whether it be in room or can it be an in-wall subwoofer or?
Yeah, the good thing is that actually the algorithm doesn't really care.
Okay.
We've tested a huge amount of subwoofers, just by virtue of the projects we've been involved with, from ported to sealed to RTL to dual opposed, force cancelling. And fundamentally, as long as we can get a good reading from the subwoofer, then we can use it.
Yeah.
As with anything, I wouldn't be advising you mix and match topologies. No. So we would always say use the same, but that's no different to how it's been previously. You guys would never mix and match in that regard. So yeah, we're not particularly wedded to one type of technology for subwoofers. It can be very flexible and work with anything.
So I suppose if I bring this to a personal point of view, especially over the last sort of 7 days, I've decided to do a little bit of an update at home. I am going to redo Immersive Cinema Rooms soon, but I had a quick swap out of a subwoofer at home recently, and put in a Paradigm seismic subwoofer in my little lounge system, not a big room. Since then, my wife has been banging on the ceiling, or banging on the floor of my ceiling in the lounge, going, will you turn that subwoofer down? I can't hear anything. I'm trying to watch TV upstairs.
Sure.
So when we look at different circumstances in a cinema, we'll take you back to a private cinema in the house. So can the waveforming be tailored to people? So not necessarily we've got 2 rows of seats and we're always going to have 2 rows of seats.
Yeah. But
can we have it tailored to different types of the amount of people in the room, or different types of, so whether it be an action movie or rom-com or something that's got a big dynamic range to it?
Yeah, this is the benefit of going into the digital domain. We by having control over all of the subwoofers, that means we can have control over their abilities. So if we want to reduce the amount of bass decay, so I think we're all fairly familiar with frequency response, right? You look at that on a graph, it either looks flat or it looks spiky, right? To very simplify it. What you don't see from that is what's happening in the time domain. So after that frequency has been played, whatever that might be, how long does it hang around in the room? Now that can be upwards of 500 milliseconds, to a second. And whilst that doesn't really sound like a lot, you got to remember that the human hearing is incredibly accurate, and we really pick up points of milliseconds worth of differences. So once we have the ability to tune how much of that decay we want to keep in the room, we can apply it to different scenarios. So let's say you want to listen to music, not the sort of bangs and crashes of movies. You want to hear the subtleties, you want to hear all of those details. We can remove more of that decay, because remember, when that instrument was recorded, its decay was also recorded. So we don't need decay on top of decay, right? So you want to reduce that as much as possible to get it reproduced in the way it was intended. But for movies, you need it a bit more lively. So we can extend that decay out to something a bit longer, still a lot less than the sort of normal, and make it a bit more fun, because that's what movies are all about, right? Music is very, very personal. We all have our tastes and our differences for music. But when we're sat down with the family watching a movie, whatever genre you decide to watch, you fundamentally want to enjoy it as a family. So we can have that ability to tune and have different profiles or presets.
So in my case, we can have dad sitting in the room on his own, watching some action movie where it's punchy, and then we can go to, a more family-friendly stuff that still has the dynamic range, is a little bit more leisurely, let's say.
And to use the example of what your dear wife was saying about the loud subwoofer, we could do a night mode where we just either reduce the very low frequencies, so that we're not transmitting that resonance around the house. There's so many scenarios we could come up with where you could use different tunings and different this, that, and the other. But ultimately, that's the benefit of the Trinnov system. We have the most amount of tools in the toolbox, and it's up to us and you guys to decide which of those you want to use.
So with the software, I think we touched on the fact that it's not available yet. When's it going to be available? How can people get hold of it? Obviously, they're going to need a Trinnov already, if not to purchase one. Will it be a paid upgrade, or will it be a freemium service?
Sure, so a freemium, I like that. So I might use that, Stuart. Thank you. So, we believe that when customers have made the investment in our product, that is enough of an investment. We're asking people, a sizable sum of money to get involved in the Trinnov architecture. And, the philosophy of the company with that longevity that we've spoken about is to get good value for money. Yes, it's a higher investment point than most, but if it's going to last you 10 years or more, and you're going to get these incremental free software upgrades that are only going to improve performance over time, we believe that should be done free of charge.
Yeah, and I touch back on my client in London who, he knew the product, and he was the one who came to me and said, "Do you do Trinnov, and do you do this?" And but I know, say for him, it's just that added little nicety that I've invested in this product and this brand, and actually, going forward, I know that the R&D is going on behind me, and I'm not going to have to buy the new latest phone. Let's take it to another premises. To get those new technologies, I've got to buy the new phone again.
And that's really what it comes down to. We could have gone down a licensing model. We could have done this. We could have done that. But fundamentally, once you invest in Trinnov architecture, you're in. We recognise that some of these new features will also need recalibration work, which is rightly going to cost some money as well. So we don't need to compound that. In our opinion, that's just the way we approach it. You asked about the release of the software. We're working towards public release. We've got a lot of news on that coming shortly. We're first working on the tools needed for the integrators to be able to specify these systems. So you guys have had a preview of some of the tools that we have available to design a system, for any given room size. How many subwoofers do I need? Where do they need to go as a baseline? How do you measure the system? All of this sort of stuff. We need to line up our integration partners to be able to deliver these systems. And then, we'll then release it to market, and all of the enthusiasts out there that do manage their own systems will go nuts and have a lot of fun with it. But fundamentally, we want to give everybody the information they need before it's out there. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
I know I've certainly gone back to my shell of a new demo room and ripped out all the plans and gone, right, we're not doing that, because now hearing it a good half a dozen, if not a dozen times, and listening to the tracks you play next door, like the Tiesto Boom song, and just that punchiness, it's almost like, right, need to start doing more jobs to get this in the demo room, because it is a game changer.
And it is a game changer. Active acoustics in general is a game changer. And I've said before, there's only so much we can do in the passive domain, and there's so much that can be achieved when you go into the digital domain with sound processing. It's sometimes a bit of an alien concept to a lot of customers, particularly more hi-fi led customers, who want to leave everything analog, everything very natural. And I think there's no perfect room.
Definitely not.
And there's also no perfect equipment.
Still want to find that perfect room.
Yeah, and that is the unicorn, and they do exist, but that is a bring money exercise.
Yeah,
that is another world. But that doesn't mean we can do some amazing things in existing spaces.
Yeah,
as long as we implement and adopt new technologies in the right way. I think that's the key message.
So I think let's start to wrap it up. I mean, is there anything else we've not covered with in our discussion about waveforming and about what people should look for? Or have we sort of pretty much got everything?
I think we've pretty well covered it. I think, again, for a lot of your listeners, understanding the fundamental problem that we're trying to overcome is the main thing, because we can talk as much as we like about subwoofers, where to put them, this, that, and the other, but what actually fundamentally is the issue?
Yeah.
And that issue, I did explain briefly, is related to the physics and the size of the room.
Yeah.
And it's where frequencies cancel out in the room. And this is what we call standing waves, and it can produce very loud peaks, and it can also produce complete cancellations at different points in the room at different frequencies. So it's not like you can pick one frequency, let's say 50 hertz, and say, right, I want to fix the room for that frequency. Well, that's fine. You can do that for one position, but what happens for the other positions in the room? You've got a big peak at 50 hertz. Well, of course, you can use EQ or other methods to draw that down to a nice level playing field with the rest of the signal. But what does that do to the other seat that's already maybe lacking 50 hertz because it's in a different point of the room? Well, now they've got nothing.
Yeah.
And, that's a very sort of, specific example. But when you think about what that is in terms of what's reproduced in a soundtrack, that could be, from a musical perspective, that could be a kick drum. That's the thump from a kick drum. That's not the chest impact. That's the later thump. When you relate it back to sounds that people can hear, then you start to realize that everybody in the room is getting a very different experience of those sounds. And that is what we're trying to solve. And that is a fairly simplified view on what we're doing. And it might sound simple, but it's, something that the industry has always struggled with. Back to, Todd Welty and Floyd Toole, when they were doing their research about where to place their subwoofers, 4 in the corners, the Welty approach, or Welty approach with 4 in the ceiling, which was an alien concept to everybody. These were all mitigation. They were able to solve a lot of the frequency domain problems, but the time domain left unchecked. Yeah. So it's taking things to the next level and, really solving the problem.
I think it's that seat-to-seat consistency. And I know recently myself, Owen from Cinema Works, a few of us have been on the RP22 course.
Yeah.
which is nice to see that CDR in the UK globally are looking more at that C2C consistency, that it's not necessarily for the money seat, as the guy who's bought the money.
Yeah.
It's his friends and his family around him as well.
Yeah, they do matter. Cinema is a and it doesn't have to be cinema. It could be, having your mates around to watch the football or the Super Bowl or the whatever, watch Glastonbury when it's on BBC. It doesn't matter what how you use that room. It can be a communal space, and everybody should have the opportunity to have a decent, a decent reproduction. And the key is that it will also benefit that money seat, because there is a sweet spot. We when you're designing cinemas, you have to design around a money seat, a sweet spot, a reference seating position, or whatever you want to call it.
Not the drunk uncle seat.
Exactly. But it doesn't mean, these improvements only benefit the main listening position or whatever. They benefit everybody, as well as that main listening position. So,
I think it's a term that I use in the immersive side of the business I have, is the fun family spaces.
Yeah.
We do a lot of public facing shows, and we quite often get asked, is it just films? And it's no. Waveforming is not just for films. Cinemas is not just for films. It's about watching and listening to the stuff you enjoy, as you said, whether that be Eurovision or during COVID, our old demo room, I was up there I wasn't up there every weekend, but the girls are in the cinema every weekend watching Strictly. So it's for every person.
Yeah, and when you have a light controlled space, you can use it for anything. I know this probably sounds a bit wacky, but if you want to use it for meditation, if you want to put on a meditation podcast that are now being produced in Dolby Atmos with lots of ambience, wind noise, and you shut your eyes, you could be in the middle of that forest or that whatever space they're trying to recreate. And this is the benefit of immersive audio. It can be used for so many different things, movies, games, podcasts, all the stuff, it's all there.
So I suppose, wrap it up question-ish, penultimate question. Obviously, in the UK, we have some facilities here in Stansted and over in Bracknell. And obviously, any listeners or viewers of this can reach out to a Home Cinema Alliance member and arrange a tour and a one-to-one to experience Trinnov and Waveforming. If we look outside of the UK, are you working with partners globally, like your sort of your South Africas and your Australias and your North Americas, for people to experience this?
Yeah, we absolutely are. We're working with speaker manufacturers all over the world.
You mentioned so you mentioned Cricks in Australia.
Cricks, but in the UK we have a couple that I can't mention yet, but you'll hear about in the not so distant future. But we've done stuff with Monitor Audio. We're looking to do stuff with Meridian. We're obviously working with the Cricks team here at Pulse. And there's a reason why speaker manufacturers are getting on board. We've got in the Netherlands, partners with Procella. We've got, again, all of these opportunities to go and hear this technology. They are available. It is growing. I think if you look at mainland Europe, it's particularly Germany, they've absolutely jumped on this because it's fairly similar to what they're already doing. So they have systems ready and waiting to go. For the rest of the world, it's a bit of an evolution. So there are opportunities. We're striving to increase those opportunities. Just get in touch, and we can point you in the right direction.
So last question, what's next for Trinnov? I mean, obviously, we're always wanting more. We've got this nice new shiny. What's next?
So
I know you said it's an interesting year, 2024 for Trinnov, and you've told me many a time there's some interesting stuff, but I still don't know what that interesting stuff is.
No, sure. So look, I'll spill a few beans, but the main one for us is that we're going through a massive evolution as a business. I mentioned that we're 20 years old. Some of you that are familiar with our Pro product will be familiar with our Nova product for the Pro audio market. That is a new platform for us, and that is a hardware platform that's going to take us well into the future. So we have more developments come on that hardware platform. In conjunction with that, we're also building a new headquarters in Paris.
which I'm so looking forward to.
Yeah,
right near the tunnel.
Yeah, and we are as well. You know, it's going to be a real destination where we can bring people. You know, we're very proud of our roots. You know, the facility that we have in Paris at the moment is very, very functional, but it's not our own building, so we can't do what we want with it. This is Arnaud Labourie's hobby, I'm going to say, because he's become a part-time architect. In the only way that
he's not becoming that person on grand designs that we always watch, that you're thinking clients involved, then they're going to get finished.
He's making good progress, and the ground has been broken on that. So you know, that's a long project in itself. You know, we're looking at probably next summer if everything goes well.
Brilliant.
But that will have multiple demonstration facilities, multiple home theatres, lecture theatres, and then R&D space in terms of labs, anechoic chambers, and other stuff. So you know, there's a lot happening this year and into next year. We will be making some announcements later in the year with some new juicies. But fundamentally, at the moment, we're leading up to release of audio over IP technologies and waveforming for public release. That's really what we're focused on at the moment.
Brilliant. That wraps it up nicely. So thanks for joining me today. Thanks for taking the time. I hope people have found it useful. And safe trip back, and we'll see you next time.
Will do. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks a lot, David. Cheers.
Pleasure.